Hi everyone, my name is Heather and welcome to Science at Home with the Armagh Observatory and Planetarium. I'm here today with our director, Professor Michael Burton, and we're going to be doing an interview basically about his research and getting to know a little bit more about him. So, hi Michael, how are you?
Very well, Heather.
Good, so I hope you don't mind me coming in during your busy day and trying to ask you some questions about your life.
No problem.
That's good. So basically, Michael, I have a set of questions here for you. They're not difficult, they're just nice and light-hearted. We just want to get to know a bit more about you, and particularly a bit more about the research that you do here in AOP. So the first question I have is, where are you from, and how did you get to be here in AOP?
Well, that's quite a long story for me. I guess I've been on the go for a few years now, but I am Australian. I grew up in Australia, and I spent the last 25 years of my life in Australia before coming here, but in fact I have worked all over the world. I actually did my secondary education in England and university at Cambridge, and then I went to Edinburgh for my PhD.
Wow.
I spent quite a bit of time in Hawaii. I joined my PhD and actually worked in Hawaii.
That is very lucky.
Yes. And then I was there for 4 years with NASA in California, working with their airborne astronomy program.
And not everyone can say that.
Not everyone knows. And then I ended up as a staff astronomer at the Anglo-Australian Telescope in Coonabarabran, which is in the western part of New South Wales. But I was living and working in Sydney. And from there I ended up getting a job at the University of New South Wales, which is where I spent the majority of my career. Until, gosh, it's nearly 4 years ago now, when somehow this opportunity here in Armagh opened up, and I left the sun and surf of Sydney to come to this wonderful climate in Armagh.
In a fit of madness, I'm sure. But I remember you arriving here, Michael. It was in 2016, because I'm only here about 4.5 years myself. So no, it was a big thing, you coming here, and I think we were all scratching our heads thinking, why has he left the sun to come to the rain? But we're glad that you are here. My next question for you is, can you explain the type of research that you do?
Yes, I can. Can I explain it so you can understand it? That was really the question.
Well, in layman's terms.
I'll try. Look, what I spent much of my research life doing is looking at molecules in space.
Okay.
In fact, I started my PhD looking at the simplest molecule in space, which is the hydrogen molecule. And you can look at the hydrogen molecule using infrared astronomy. So in fact, I began my life as an infrared astronomer, which is all about, essentially it's heat radiation. The infrared is like heat radiation. And I got my training by going to the UKIRT telescope, which is the UK infrared telescope on top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii. It's a 4,000 metre volcano.
Wow.
Yes, for the first 15 years of my life, it was all involving observational astronomy using the infrared, and mostly studying the hydrogen molecule in space. But then things changed. I was in Australia. The facilities were for various reasons, getting shut down. I was looking for new opportunities. And it came through radio astronomy. Australia, while shutting some facilities down, was investing in others. And we developed facilities for very high frequency radio astronomy, what's actually called millimetre wave astronomy, wavelengths about this size, about a millimetre. And it just so happens that that's the right wavelength looking at molecules in space, cold molecules in space. When you look at a hydrogen molecule, you're actually looking at a hot molecule which has been hit by a shock wave or something like that.
Yeah.
But most molecules in space are actually very, very cold. The coldest places in our universe are actually the molecular clouds in interstellar space. They can get down to 10 degrees above absolute zero. And they can be seen through radio observation, millimetre wave. And so I got into millimetre astronomy to study them.
And have you progressed on since radio astronomy? Has doing your research in radio astronomy made you think, oh, there's other areas that I could go into to help me learn more about these things I'm looking at?
Well, funny you say that, because indeed I'm in the process of doing another change in wavelengths. I went from sort of low energy to very low energy, which is radio, and I'm now actually going the other way into very high energy, which is gamma rays. But in fact, the gamma rays are intimately connected to the molecular clouds in space. And in fact, it's the observations of the molecular clouds I'm doing which are helping me get into a new telescope project called the Cherenkov Telescope Array, which is there to measure the very highest energy radiation that arrives on the Earth from space.
Wow, that's really, really fascinating. And the fact that you're doing that here in Armagh as our director as well is really, I mean, we're very lucky to have you. Now, so you've already touched upon my next question. It's about the use of telescopes in your research. So clearly you have used telescopes as part of your research, but is there any telescope in particular that stands out to you as you think, wow, that was a really great experience using this particular telescope?
Well, they all have actually. I've been lucky to use telescopes actually on every continent. I have actually observed in every continent. I started off with, as I said, the UCURT telescope. In Australia, I initially was using the Anglo-Australian telescope, which is actually an optical telescope, 4 metre size, and one of the great optical observatories around the world. I've used telescopes in Antarctica. I've used them in Chile on top of the Atacama Desert. But in fact, most of the last probably 10, 15 years, I've been using this radio telescope called MOPRA. MOPRA is in the Warrumbungles National Park of Australia. It's actually very close to the Anglo-Australian telescope, in a really beautiful setting. And when I used to go there to observe with it, yes, it was a fantastic time. Originally you had to go to the telescope, and you'd sit there and you'd sometimes be there for a couple of weeks. And MOPRA was actually quite isolated. You'd actually be there by yourself. Good practice for some of the current
yes, for the current climate,
that's going in.
You're well versed in social isolation.
Social isolation. You only had the kangaroos to keep you company when you were there. But now actually astronomy's become, it's much more efficient, but you don't actually have to go to telescopes very often. You can actually sit and run your telescopes from your desk, which does make it much easier and much more efficient, but you do miss some of the great experiences when you actually have to spend time at the observatories.
So obviously this research that you're doing can be quite difficult. I mean, it sounds very time consuming and you put a lot of time and energy into it. So the next question I would have is, what is the most difficult part of your research? Have you come into any snags that really stand out in your memory?
Well, research is, in one sense, always about overcoming snags. It's continuously snags. But actually the biggest issue I find is simply finding time to do it.
Yeah.
I don't find time to do research anymore, at least only little bits. But look, in research, in many ways, it's about continually solving problems. You're essentially getting from one problem to the next problem to the next problem and trying to find ways of overcoming it. Whether it's simply the fact that your computer program doesn't work, or whether it's your telescope is broken, or whether it's more mundane that you haven't been able to get your application for time in this telescope accepted, or could it be more basic like your funding application was turned down? Or whatever. There's always continual challenges but the key thing for doing any research well is to be able to find time to focus on that research and not be distracted by other things. And of course, as one gets, on in one's career, those distractions become more and more apparent, and it's much harder to find time to do any real research anymore.
Well, you've already mentioned a couple of places around the globe that you have been researching, and I think you probably have the best place to say that you've been to research. So my question to you is, where is the coolest or most unusual place your research has taken you? And I think you already know the answer.
Well, I think that, yes, the answer is Antarctica. And
I mean, that's absolutely incredible. You're the only person I know that I can say, this guy has been to Antarctica. What was that like?
It's an amazing experience, actually. In fact, it's the closest thing you'll get to going into space for most people. It's not going into space, but you're going to a place, certainly the centre of Antarctica, the South Pole, which is 1 day and 1 night per year. The sun is literally spinning around the horizon. And you're standing on top of the plateau. The Antarctic plateau is completely flat. It's just an ice sheet. Wow. There's a very slight slope, about a 10th of a degree, but you don't really recognise that. And you're there, it's 30, 40 degrees below zero, the sun's shining, the sky is blue, the ice is white. Yeah. It's a truly incredible place. A very harsh place. It's not something you can live very easily in, but it's truly an incredible place. And the conditions actually are exceptional for some forms of astronomy, particularly the infrared astronomy and the millimetre wave astronomy. The two forms of astronomy I do, the climatic conditions there are particularly good for astronomy.
Well, you'll be sad to hear that we're coming to the end of our interview, Michael. So I have one final question for you, and it is, why should more people consider science for their future career, in your opinion?
Well, science provides a way of trying to understand and make sense of the world around you in a quantitative manner, in a coherent manner. And given all the challenges we're facing, not just the current ones with disease, but ones like global warming, we do need rational understanding of the world around us in order to try and to solve and to live sustainably in our world. Mm-hmm. Science is a way of doing that. Science can be fun. Science can be fantastically stimulating as well. All these things come together. As a scientist, you never really know from one day to the next what you're going to be doing. So there's always an adventure out there, and it's also good for you and it's good for the world.
Michael, thank you so much for doing this interview with us today. And guys, that's it for our final Science at Home video with Michael. Hopefully we'll have Michael with us in the future for maybe a live Q&A session that might be in a bit of a different setting rather than the lovely office here in the observatory. But if you have any questions that you would maybe like to ask Michael in the future, please do send them in to us. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your day.